What does it mean to thrive? Why do some kids flourish and others flounder? Answers to those questions is what our first guest today sought to find out, using a blend of science, decades of research, and work as an educator, as well as her own experience as a mom of 3 sons. Dr. Michele Borba is an educational psychologist, a speaker, an award-winning author, and sought-after media contributor. Her clients have included everyone from Sesame Street and military personnel to royalty. She's written 25 books, and her latest is called Thrivers: The Surprising Reasons Why Some Kids Struggle and Others Shine. Dr. Michele Borba joins us today from Palm Springs, California. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor.
Dr. Borba, your portfolio, as briefly outlined, is expansive, and you bring a multitude of perspectives to the question of what constitutes a thriver. So what was your approach to writing this book?
Well, what I really wanted to do was look at the science. What does science tell us, help us as parents raise kids who are going to be more resilient? And then came the pandemic, which I realized, oh my gosh, what an absolutely more critical time in order to figure this out. But the second thing is, once I realized we can do it, that thrivers are made, not born, I began to interview kids across the United States and many of them in Canada, asking them what are the top button issues that concern you, and stress and anxiety came up as over the top, and need for coping strategies and skills. Thrivers develop skills. They're ones that are easy to teach, but they start to learn them at a very young age. And a result, when push comes to shove and kids face the adversity or the challenge, which they will, they're more likely to say, we got this, because they have the skills to help them bounce back.
So thrivers are made, not born. That is an important point, and I'm sure you've gotten the attention of all of our parent listeners. So what is a thriver to you?
A thriver is really a child who, again, when he faces the challenge, says, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to give up. I got this. They're more self-directed. They have a sense of agency or self-mastery, driven by themselves. Now, it doesn't mean you're giving them the car keys and say, go, sweetie pie, but they're not waiting to be hovered or lawnmowered or rescued by the parent. Gradually along the way, from toddler to teen and there above, parents start helping them learn the skills so that the child knows that they can survive and thrive in whatever comes their way.
So what does it take to build a child who is a thriver?
First, as parents, it's putting it intentionally onto our agenda, that we do know that this is a different world than with the one that we were growing up, or if not a pandemic, what else is coming down the pike? And we can't always be there to help rescue our children. Plus, if we really want high-performing and healthy, mentally healthy kids, we've got to add this to the plate. Second of all, in the book Thrivers, it comes up with 7 strengths that are the most highly correlated to research, saying these are the ones that our kids will need. And we need from birth till whatever comes, birth from womb to tomb. But maybe it's taking a moment to look at the 7 and say, which one are we already addressing in our homes? And where's the vacant part? Once you know the vacant part, you start with confidence, because that's really the base for resilience, that the child knows this is who I am. And we focus a little more on his assets, not his deficits. And then the rest of it comes from slowly beginning to help identify the skill sets and start weaving them into our everyday practices, our everyday home lives with our children.
We are in conversation with Dr. Michele Borba, educational psychologist and award-winning author, about what it takes to raise a child who is thriving. I'm Lianne Castelino, and this is Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region. Let's drill down into what you just said, Dr. Borba, in terms of those 7 teachable characteristics. What are they, and how can parents help cultivate them in their children?
All right, here they go. They're all science-backed, evidence-based, from researchers who are looking at huge cohorts of children who are growing up in very adverse situations. And despite it, they became invincible. Wars, poverty, sexual abuse, schizophrenic parents, and they still bounce back. One of them is confidence. The child knows who I am. He's got that strength forte so that when push comes to shove, he's still got that inner drive that goes, I can do this. Then comes that sense of empathy. He's driven by we, not me. He's got the social competence. Not that he has 50,000 friends, but we do know that social competence plays a huge role in our children's lives. So he's got a cadre or skills to be able to handle life with others. Third one is self-control. Boy, we know this one's critical right now, but he can kind of put the brakes on when the stress starts to build. He's got those strategies that keep the stress down and his mental health and mental strength up until there. Integrity, fascinating. But what we do know is that children who have that strong moral code, sometimes the adversity is peer pressure. Or should I or shouldn't I? He doesn't have to whimper and waver. He knows what he stands for, so he can forge ahead. Curiosity. Oh, I love this one. It kept coming up that these are out-of-the-box thinkers. They're little problem solvers. They don't wait for us to say, why don't you do this, sweetie pie? They've got it because they know the skills of how to solve the problem on their own. Then comes perseverance. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep on going because he's got a growth mindset. And finally is optimism. I've got a sense of hope along the way. They're not Pollyannas, but they can really keep the lid on their worries and think of the somewhat of that silver lining so that they can keep forging ahead. Now, that sounds like a big crunch, but the problem is we sometimes try to take on too much. I always tell parents, those are the 7. They're going to keep coming up the rest of your children's lives from now until adulthood. So forge in on which ones do your children need. I'd say in today's world, self-control is the critical one. Empathy, because our kids have been social distance for so long and they're lonely. That epidemic is going up. And optimism, because they've been seeing horrific kinds of images from a steady death toll every day for the last almost 2 years. So those are the ones that we really need now. The rest are going to keep coming in.
Parents listening to you are going to say, that sounds fantastic. And, she's compartmentalized it down into 7 buckets, and I get it. But the fact is I'm busy as a mother or a father, and I just don't have time to intentionally think about all these 7 things with every other thing I'm doing in a day. So how can they build these concepts into teachable moments, Dr. Borba?
First of all, I'm right there with you. There's nothing more difficult in the world than parenting, and we try to take on too much, and we get overwhelmed, and we don't get the change that we want. So compartmentalize, I love the term. Look at the 7 and say, which one is doable for me right now that my kids need or I need? There you go, because the best way to teach a skill is by showing, not telling. And maybe it's self-control. Okay, now how do you take that one down a notch? Thrivers will give you at least 30 skills you can teach. Don't teach them all or your kid will never let you read another book. So instead, take one skill. Maybe it's this week, let's walk around the house and figure out what makes each of us a little bit more stressed. And identify our stress signs. Identify your own, identify dad's, identify grandma's. But I noticed that right before you go to do that time test, your hands go in that fist, or your little feet start to get a little edgy when you don't get that nap. If you can help the kid identify when they're most stressed, it's not 24/7, and what's causing it, that's your first step. Second of all, what you can do next week is let's create a calm down places in our house. What anybody can use. What do you think would help you calm down? Teens say it's music. So you could start by putting musical selections just over your loudspeaker system, but many kids say that they create a playlist. One girl, 14-year-old Natalie, said, it's Mozart. I said, really, Mozart? She said, yeah, it took me quite a while. Then my mom started playing it and I realized, wow, it really helps soothe me. So I started putting those on my playlist. Little kids, maybe it's beanbag chairs or books to just look through or glitter jars. You can even create calm down corners in your home. Later on, you want your teen to be able to know that's my go-to. So when I go off to college, which is the number one time when our kids are most likely to drop out, end of freshman year, because they don't have the coping skills, says all the university professors, they can take those with them. It could be a 1-2 breath. Just a moment you start to get stressed, everybody watch me. I can take a slow, deep breath from way deep in my tummy. Write it up like I'm writing up an elevator. Keep thinking of the breath. Hold it, then slowly let it out. The exhale's twice as long as the inhale. That's so simple. It doesn't cost a dime. But if you keep doing it a minute a day for at least 21 days, that's doable. What you now do is teach your child a skill they're going to use the rest of their life without you.
Tell me, Dr. Borba, what surprised you most in the course of all of the research that you did and certainly in writing this book?
How strongly correlated that resilience is to mentally healthy children. But I think the other thing is the concern I had was how much we put all of our emphasis as parents onto the GPA and the test score. Mm-hmm. So someplace along the line, we've created this imbalance that we think because the kid has the high GPA or the high IQ or the great test scores, that he's also going to become resilient. And there was our mistake, because it's two different skill sets. That means we just need to slowly add those 1 minute a day kind of ideas within our homes and help our kids also really learn those skills of resilience.
I'm curious, what impact, if any, do you believe that the pandemic will have, has had, could have on this topic of building and cultivating thriving children as we move forward?
Well, I think the good news is, let's start with the good news, right? Is that maybe it's this once in a lifetime opportunity for all of us to parents to hit the reset button and say our kids need something else. Because if not a pandemic, who knows what else is going to come down the pike? It's recognizing it's an uncertain, anxious new world, recognizing that all of the research worldwide is saying our kids are suffering from mental health problems and they do need these skills. So I think that's the first thing. Second, in terms of which kid's going to make it and which kid's going to thrive or survive or really struggle, the fascinating thing, it comes down to a couple of key points in any time a child faces adversity. First is, do they have a calm presence in their lives? That's us, the caring champion who refuses to give up on the kids. So maybe the first step is boost your own sense of, how am I doing during this time? Am I modeling calmness? Do I need the 1-2 skill? Maybe I'm the one that can keep practicing it so my child sees it and has that calmness. The second thing, which was disturbing to me, is all of the research on resilience also says the child usually has pre-existing coping strategies, protective buffers. So when push comes to shove, he knows how to problem solve, or he knows how to cope, or he knows how to assert himself. If he doesn't have those, he's more likely to struggle. It doesn't mean it's too late now, but it does mean those are the kids we need to look at a little closer because they may be suffering right now.
We have only just scratched the surface of this subject matter. So much more to talk to you about, but our time is up. Dr. Michele Borba, mom of 3, educational psychologist, and author of the book Thrivers. Thank you for sharing your time and insight with us today.
You are so welcome.
Welcome back. Our next guest is perhaps best known for being a 3-time Olympic medalist, having reached the podium at the 84, 92, and 96 Olympics in rowing. She's also the architect of one of the greatest comebacks in Canadian Olympics history. Since retiring from the sport, she's added author, speaker, and mental health and child advocate, among other accomplishments, to her portfolio. A native of Mississauga, Ontario, she's also a mother of 2 and a stepmother of 2, including a daughter with severe autism. The latest figures in Canada show that 1 in 66 children in this country between age 5 and 17 is diagnosed with autism. Boys are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed than girls. Autism and autism spectrum disorder are described as developmental conditions because symptoms often form in the first 2 years of life. The condition primarily affects a child's communication and behavior. To discuss her journey parenting a child on the autism spectrum, we're joined by Silken Laumann, who's on the line from her home in Victoria, BC. Silken, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me and talking about this important topic.
So let's start with this topic as it relates to the pandemic. What would you say has struck you most about, parents having to deal with exceptionalities in their children through this pandemic time frame that has affected all of us so greatly?
I think for parents with children with special needs, I think it's fair to say that most of them and most of us are hanging on by a thread at any one time. And particularly when the kids are young, that if your child is able to go to school, those few hours that you have in a day are so precious. And it's hard to imagine that being gone, and yet that's exactly what happened during the pandemic. Our special needs children, their whole worlds were toppled upside down, and in many ways, all of that, well, not in many ways, really 100%, all of that fell back on the family. And you can't just put a special needs child in the care of a neighbor or a daycare or something like that. And so parents, by the vast majority, many of them had to quit their jobs. The living situations, in our house, our daughter's older. So she's 23 years old and 25 years old. I get all my kids mixed up because they're so close in age. And because my husband is immune compromised, when the pandemic first started, we had to move her full time into her day home overnight. And there was no way of helping her understand that. We couldn't do it gradually. And it was just a huge upheaval for us and our family. Honestly, like through the pandemic, I feel like the families of special needs kids, I mean, they've really been left behind, and it's been like, you just have to cope with it. We're really lucky. We have the resources to hire people, and we have a pretty good network after so many years. But I really feel for those families who maybe have a child who's just been recently diagnosed with autism, or just getting, they're at capacity or almost beyond capacity on a daily basis, and now are having to have their child 24/7. And it's not like having another child 24/7. I have 4 kids, and I know it's a big difference when you have a special needs child. It takes up so much energy.
So what would be your message to these parents, Silken, to give them some kind of hope in this particularly uncertain time and, everything that you just described?
Well, I always come back as a parent. I always come back to self-care, which sounds like such a, overused word, but it really is so essential that we find little ways of filling our well so that we have something to give to our kids and to our families. And so, like for me, I always rely on my fitness. That's really important. It's a great outlet for me. I also do meditation and yoga. I try to watch what I eat. But, for some of these parents, they're just so overwhelmed. They have to think more in 10-minute intervals. I'm going to take 10 minutes to meditate and breathe. I'm going to take 10 minutes to call a friend. And the other thing that I would say around hope is, there's a lot of other parents out there. So connecting with other parents and maybe doing some tag teaming where you take another child for a few hours and then, you kind of do some swapping, because all of your normal routines and ways of lightening your load are kind of non-existent right now. So you've got to look at different ways.
This is Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region. I'm Lianne Castelino, and we're talking about autism and parenting children with exceptionalities. Our guest is Silken Laumann, mother of 4, 3-time Olympic medalist, and author. Silken, you mentioned your 4 children who are all in their early 20s and roughly 8 months apart, which is pretty amazing. Your stepdaughter Keely has a range of exceptionalities, including severe autism, bipolar disorder, and intellectual disabilities. What was your approach when you were first introduced to Keely and eventually when you became her stepmother as it relates to learning how to care for a child with these special needs?
Wow. I think in the beginning, I was just so naive. I remember thinking when she would have behavior outbursts, something needs to be done about that, and we're not doing things correctly because look at her behavior. And when I think back now, I just think, oh my God, I was so judgmental and I so thought, there was an answer. And I think what I've learned more than anything is to accept what is and to accept that there may not be an answer in the way that I want it. So, I always want to fix things and make them right and, change them. And Keely has really taught me to embrace where she's at, who she is. And on the one hand, I think having that balance, it's always there where we're trying to push her to have more language, push her to manage her behaviors, to, have strategies to handle her emotions, all of those things. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that we're loving and accepting her for who she is as a person. Is amazing. She brings so much joy to our life. And in the beginning, I really had that fix it attitude, and that made for some really rough years.
Which is such a natural inkling, right? And a natural way for parents to want to fix things. So it must have been a journey for you to be able to try to stop doing that.
Well, and I guess that's where I come back to, like, coming back to ourselves, right? As I was able to sort of accept and, get more engaged in the meditation and the yoga and all the things that I've done over the last 15, 20 years, I think it's brought me to a place with all my kids, not just Keely. I mean, I have kids with learning differences and other mental health challenges, right? So it's kind of like, especially when you're raising teenagers and they're moving into their 20s, when a lot of mental health stuff comes up, that acceptance and that, not trying to fix, but to understand, first seeking to understand and to listen. I think those were skills that were taught to me through Keely, and they've helped me with all my children. So I feel very blessed to have that. I run an organization called Unsinkable Youth, and we publish and we're a platform for all sorts of young people sharing their stories. And we have children on the spectrum who have shared their stories with us. And, the pandemic has been a uniquely difficult time for them. Sometimes it's about really understanding it, but a lot of the time it's about the increased social isolation in a population that's already too socially isolated.
So on that note, what do you believe should be done in the short term to adequately support parents of children with special needs?
Well, I think, I hate to always come back to money because money doesn't solve everything. But I know that in our family, for instance, we have been able to do better with our daughter because we have adequate resources to hire one-on-one care for her. And this is something that's just grossly lacking in the world of special needs. Everything from, the special needs community, access to, recreation, which I'm passionate about, and sport, to learning and just having day-to-day companions and learning opportunities. They're just so much more limited in the special needs community. So that would do a lot. And I think in this pandemic, I don't think anybody asked the question, okay, well, if we're closing all of the schools and we're closing, all of the day programs for these kids, what are we going to do to support the parents? Mm-hmm. And, the idea that, the kid will just come home and everything will be fine. That's just not the case. A family can only handle so much. And sometimes with autism and other issues, it is too much. And certainly, when I was raising my kids and Keely came into our life, I mean, it was a complicated environment to navigate. And there were definitely times where I just had to reach out for help and hire a caregiver. And, we had to make decisions on Keely, about Keely, based on the health of our other kids too.
Absolutely. And it makes me wonder how that experience and your very sort of public face around all of these topics, like, your struggle with mental health in childhood and as an adult, all of these things, caring for Keely, etc. How has that impacted the way that you parent your children?
Oh, it's so profoundly. let's just take for a moment like my own mental health journey and how that sort of motivated me to create this platform, Unsinkable and Unsinkable Youth. I mean, the stories that I've heard and how I've been educated by young people a lot of the time who share what it is like to have autism, what it is like to have bipolar disorder. And it gets me thinking and actually challenging my own sort of ideas of what mental health is, what autism is. And that's so good for us, right? Because whether we know it or not, we all have these preconceived notions. Even as we talk about special needs children here today, people have, preconceived notions of what that is and what that looks like. And hearing from so many young people over the years and just talk so authentically and vulnerably about their experiences. I mean, I just don't see the world the same way. I don't see, I think in my parenting, it's made me so open to deep and authentic conversation with my kids around their mental health, around what's really going on in their life and how, most people are walking around the world, with a persona slapped onto themselves. And that's not, they're projecting out what their life really is. And, I think my kids have an awareness of authenticity and the authentic problems and challenges that people face that's pretty deep. And that probably started with Keely and expanded into kind of mental health. And, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I've been able to view the world from this lens and have been exposed to so many young people that are educating and advocating and redefining what it is to have special needs.
One of the raw and harsh burdens that many parents of children with autism and other special needs have to face on a daily basis who will care for that child when that parent is gone. How do you deal with this, Silken?
This kind of question it almost becomes paralyzing, really, because it can become so fear-based, right? Like what's going to happen and what's going to happen if my child it becomes vulnerable and, the worst case scenario is an abusive situation and I'm not there to fix it. Right. And, these children they're not, when they become adults, they're still so vulnerable. And how do we make peace with it? I mean, for me and my husband, it's been a lot about not living in a fear and really believing and having some faith that we can find and work with Keely and all of her team to find the right solution for her. I think I'm fortunate in that, Keely has a mom. I'm her stepmom. Keely also has, siblings. My children care passionately about her. They're involved with her care. And so I feel like some of that burden, and hopefully it won't be a burden, hopefully it will also be a joy, will be picked up by Keely's siblings. But we also have a plan in place, of course, with her living with other people with disabilities.
Silken Laumann, retired Canadian Olympian, author, advocate, and mother of 4. We appreciate your time and candor on this topic today.
Thanks.